Yes, where's the coffee maker?
Trader Joe's. Babka. It's a babka. Okay. Good evening. I'd like to start with a L'chaim for two reasons. First of all, tonight is a very special day. It's called the second Pesach. Second Pesach is in the desert. Jewish people didn't know the second year around, the first anniversary of the first Pesach, if they would be celebrating again or not. And surprisingly, God told them to celebrate Pesach and to bring a sacrifice. The problem is some of the Jews were carrying Joseph's bones, or him and his brothers, they were carrying their coffins out, and they were ritually impure, and they didn't have enough time to purify themselves. So they came complaining to Moses, why should we lose out on this special mitzvah? So Moshe goes to God, and God says, we'll give them a second chance a month later. So tonight is that second chance, and this is a big lesson for second chances in life. But I also heard a fascinating take on the word l'chaim that a colleague of mine shared with me, that he shared with his class last week, and I thought it was fascinating, so I figured I'd share it now. So first, a l'chaim, a pre-l'chaim, l'chaim. So, how is l'chaim translated usually? L'chaim is translated to life. What are the two middle letters of the word life? The word life. If life is full of ifs, a lot of uncertainties. Chaim in Hebrew is spelled Chet Yud Mem. The two middle letters of the word Chaim in the Siddur, they usually refer to as God's name, as God. If we live our lives following God's commands and wishes, then the first and last letter of Chaim is Cham. Cham means warm. Then our lives are warm and comfortable. So we approach life knowing there's a lot of ifs. There's a lot of decisions we're going to have to make that don't necessarily have clear-cut, black and white answers. And if we approach it that we are looking to do and accomplish what God wants us to accomplish, then we can be sure that we will be cozy in the warmth of those decisions as opposed to the opposite. So l'chaim. Time to all the ifs in life. And for second chances. Okay. So to introduce today's lesson, I don't know how many of you read the case study. We're not going to read it inside. There's also no video on it. There is a little video that I have. Maybe I'll share it on the chat afterwards. Just an interview with the gentleman. But basically, there is an elderly 104-year-old Australian who lived a good life, is not sick, and it doesn't have a terminal illness, but is losing the ability to live as independently as they're used to or want to. And recently, not recently, this is already a number of years ago, but the person fell and broke something, and doctor encouraged them that it would be wise to go to a nursing home or to get full-time care. And this was a choice they didn't want to make. And so this person was flying to Switzerland to take his life. Switzerland, I think now has tourism suicide. It's one of the only countries that allows suicide, even if you're not a citizen of that country. Anyhow, since then, many of the Australian provinces or states, whatever they're called, have legalized physician-assisted suicide. However, only if there's a terminal illness or some sort of illness or a lot of pain. There are caveats with it. The question we have today that we're going to address, one of them, is going to be premised on this case study, and that is, do you believe an individual who is of sound mind, who is relatively healthy for a 104-year-old, doesn't have an illness that's going to kill him, but just doesn't feel they're living life the way they'd like to, do you think they should be free to choose to end their lives?
Yes.
Yes. Anyone disagree? Anyone agrees with Roger?
I think whether we agree with the choice or not, they have the freedom to do so. That's the freedom of choice.
So
Should they? It's a different story.
that's not the question. Should they be allowed to choose that? Should they have the freedom to choose that? No, they don't.
Kill themselves, they do. They
Huh?
have the choice to do it.
Okay. Okay, correct. But do you know that if you fail, legally in many places, you could be tried for attempted murder? Okay, so you're not really free to choose that. I don't think you could get the death penalty for attempted murder, but point well taken.
It couldn't help.
Do you know? Do you know that? Do you know that? Do you know the guy who was sitting up? He was sitting on his couch watching football, and his wife passes by, and he's like, "Honey, come. We have to. I want to talk to you a little bit about end of life issues that recently we've been discussing, and I want to share with you my wishes." And the first thing he said was that, if I'm in a vegetative state, I don't want to live life like that. Please pull out the plug. So she runs over to the television and pulls out the plug. So there are different types of murder, or different types of
Might be justifiable.
justice.
Something that could kill you, is that the same thing?
Okay, so the question is, should a person be legally free to choose to end their lives? Yes. Okay, Roger says yes. Anyone agrees with Roger? Does anyone disagree with Roger?
I have heard definitively.
Okay, so the next thing would be, are there certain scenarios in which you think it would be allowed?
I don't know in this one, but I do know if the person's in unbearable pain and agony, I believe it should.
Okay, so there are situations if there's a terminal illness and there's zero quality of life. How do you determine zero quality? In other words, is zero, when you say zero, are you saying 0, or is there a number at which you'd be comfortable, or who determines zero?
If you just, so for yourself too, but then like Justin, extreme pain, or
What about-
you can't get out of bed, you are not functioning with what you think is a human.
Okay, and what about for a family or a doctor to make the decision if you can't? Can they determine when you decide life ends?
It's your life.
Right, so if you can't make the decision for yourself, can someone else do it for you?
That's correct.
If there's no directive, no. So a family shouldn't be able to pull the plug.
Oh. If they're vegetative, pull the plug.
Okay, yeah, I just flipped a little.
Chance of
Because I went,
brain activity, or if there's no chance that they'll ever come out of it, then yeah, I think. that
Okay.
it should.
okay. Case study number 2. An 11-year-old boy, this is on page 52, we'll read this inside. This is a halachic question posed to Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, who we will discuss a number of times. We mentioned him last week. We're going to speak about him, one of the leading halachic authorities in our time. Was questioned like this: an 11-year-old boy has been suffering for the past 2 years from a cancerous growth in his brainstem. A significant accumulation of fluid was recently detected in his brain ventricles. And don't ask me how to pronounce this. Shunt was surgically, like a tube, was surgically inserted to drain the excess fluid. His physicians now seek to implant a different tube because the original tube has become blocked or infected. This procedure entails minimal risk but it will prolong the boy's life, and together with that, his suffering. Now, this is a case where this child will die from this illness. He's not being healed. He's not going to be healed from this illness. He's going to die. The question is, when will he die? Okay. Is there an obligation to proceed with the surgery? Okay. So actually this was in the Chicago court system. The father wanted the doctors to perform the procedure. The mother wanted the doctors not to perform the procedure. And the judge ruled that the mother's wishes should be followed. And 2 days later, the boy died. That's just the technical part of the story, of the story, not relevant to our conversation here. So the question we're being posed is, how would you rule if you were the judge and you had to decide between which parent, but if you were in that situation, what would you think would be the appropriate response? Is there, So for sure, no obligation, you wouldn't even do it. And if someone would do it, would that make sense to you?
Somebody else wants to do it for their kid, that's their choice. I wouldn't.
But the question is, if there's objectively no quality of life, why would you be okay with someone else doing it? Prolonging suffering.
My choice.
By the way, you're
Is the kid able to speak for himself at this?
so legally that he wouldn't be able. Yeah, but halachically he's the best decision maker. Potentially.
He's able to speak and says, no, I think you have to operate.
If he says, I want the operation.
No, if he says he wants it,
Either way,
then you have to honor it.
Right.
Yes.
My question, very good.
My quip about paying the bill is also important because these things can bankrupt families.
100%.
There's no insurance involved in it, and if they're not paying for it.
Could you listen to what you just said? You just said that if the child says he wants the procedure, you should do it, but you're worried about bankrupting a family when the child wants to live a little longer? I'm asking, is that a valid concern? Here's not the parent making the decision. The child says, I want to live another few weeks.
listen, I think you have to have the child live.
I do too. I think that
So then the money issue isn't an issue.
if money isn't an issue.
No, I'm saying-
money is an issue,
Yeah.
That's another question, and I don't know the answer. But I think that if the kid is gonna die anyway.
Doesn't this fall under 12-month rule? Is that what we established?
We established that there may not be an obligation to try medication or procedures that risk killing him earlier, but also potentially will extend his life permanently. We did not discuss about extending life temporarily. We weren't talking about that. Last class, we were talking specifically about extending life permanently. In other words, that the person can go back to living a regular life. Here we're talking about end of life. There's no question the end of life is approaching. The question is, do we have an obligation to prolong it as much as possible, and at what expense? If we do, at what expense? The expense of money, perhaps, at the expense of pain and suffering, at the expense of emotional and mental health of the patient or the family, etc. At what expenses do we do this? This is the question we're posing today. Now, these two case studies are obviously very different from each other because the first case study, so the condition, there is no condition, right? It's just old age, and the proposed action is to actively end life. However, they are going to do it in Switzerland, okay, whether it's administering medication or whatever. But on the case study 2 is the polar opposite. Here you have a young child who is dying of a terminal illness, And here, you're not doing anything to actively kill the patient. All you're doing is not performing a procedure to prolong the patient's life. So it's two polar opposite case studies that we have. But the common theme that we have here is we want to minimize pain. We also want the value of life. In the first case study, right? Now, just to clarify, there are two types of actively ending life. There's what is known as euthanasia, which is where the doctor administers the lethal drugs. So the doctor is technically killing the patient. And then there's physician-assisted suicide, which is where the doctor will prescribe or advise the patient what concoction they should take in order to make this happen, but the patient does it themselves. That's why it's called suicide, but it's physician-assisted suicide. For our purposes today, from a halachic perspective, there's no difference. In other words, there may be a difference in biblical times. If this was considered murder, who would get the... But as far as if it would be permissible when, it doesn't make a difference. If you're allowed to end life, the doctor can do it and you can do it. If you can't end life, you can't do it and the doctor can't either do it. So from a halachic perspective, both of these go on to the same thing.
I think that's interesting because we're doing no delineation between free will and actively seeking someone else's help. If you do it yourself, you're activating the free will and free choice to do it.
But remember, yeah.
So you're activating your own free will to do it. If the doctor does it, you said it was okay, but somebody else is taking the action.
What's the difference? It's your free will to allow him to take the action.
Actually doing it, you're not. You know, where does your free will end?
Yeah, but the only way euthanasia would be allowed under these circumstances is where you allow the doctor to do it.
But I'm saying for the doctor, like that, isn't there a world in which you can't, what would be appropriate for the person? You're saying there is no difference. I do see a difference between a person who takes their own life and somebody else who
Makes someone else take their.
who's actively helping them. But they mean literally doing the deed.
I don't understand what the difference is.
Well, do it yourself, no one else is involved. So
Okay, 1 second. If you don't want to,
the doctor administering the drugs.
I just heard from a religious Jewish man who sat in prison for a few months for insider trading, a small time thing, and he was sharing his lessons learned from this experience. And the background of the story is that basically he did a few things back in 8 years ago. And then his wife said something to him one night that caused him to stop. And then years later, he was dragged into a case to be used against someone else, but he refused to testify against the other person. So he was charged for his own crimes. But basically his wife called him one night. He said he has to go to his friend's house. His wife said, "Why do you have to go? Why can't you just call him?" He's like, "I feel better not talking to him over the phone about it." So his wife said, "If there's something you're uncomfortable talking over the phone about, don't talk about it.
Right.
If you're uncomfortable someone else doing it for you, then that means you're uncomfortable doing it yourself. That means there's something wrong doing it yourself. If there's nothing wrong with taking the life, then who cares if it's okay in a hypothetical world where it would be okay to do this, who cares who does it?"
So, did you say those two cases are the same though?
No, there's a common theme. The common theme between these two cases is there's a tension between the value of life and the desire to minimize pain, right? So this older man who didn't have much pain, but his value of life was going dramatically down. And for him, this was a whole departure from life, okay? The child obviously is in a much different scenario, but the tension between them is the same type of tension. Okay, where does the United States stand on the right to die issue? So this was addressed by the Supreme Court in the Cruzan versus Director, Missouri Department of Health. And basically, the points of this decision were that, first of all, a patient has a constitutional right to refuse medical treatment. Okay, so if there's a medical treatment to prolong life, the patient has the right to refuse it. Now, artificial feeding is considered a medical treatment, and the right to refuse treatment covers it as well. So a person can refuse a feeding tube. The right to refuse treatment applies to both withholding care as well as withdrawing care. So there's no difference between refusing to be intubated or to be put on life support and to remove the life support. And number 4, the right to refuse treatment pertains to all patients, even those who are not terminally ill. Right? So even if you have no risk of dying at this point, you can refuse treatment, which may lead to the risk of dying, but it doesn't matter what stage you are, you're allowed to refuse treatment.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what happens if it's not enough to withhold treatment? The person wants drugs to kill themselves, physician-assisted suicide. So the Supreme Court did not rule on this. Instead, they determined that the states would have to decide. And as of November of 2022, it was legal in 11 U.S. jurisdictions, including California and New Jersey. A number of other countries have also legalized it. Most of the countries, however, restrict it to terminally ill patients. Some countries allow, even for non-terminally ill patients, and I believe even for mental health people that struggle with mental health issues. And however, the doctor from the first case study, the 104-year-old from Australia, wouldn't fit any of these criteria, and therefore he had to go to Switzerland, which I believe may have been or may still be the only country that allows that places no restrictions on this. You have a map in your book showing the countries and states that legalize it versus those that don't. Okay. Now, we come from a tradition that has grappled with these questions of what to do at the end of life. Do we have kosher advanced directives that we can give? Since, as we discussed last week, our body is not ours, it's God's. How are we meant to deal with this issue? And how are we meant to make decisions at this point in life? So first, we're going to discuss the Torah view on physician-assisted suicide, and then we will go on for the treatment of terminally ill. Okay. Where do we know the concept of suicide from the Torah? And by the way, as you'll soon see, this is not Jewish in nature, because this mitzvah, this prohibition against suicide, was given not just to Jews, but to Noah. This is one of the 7 Noahide laws. So let's look at text 1. This is from Genesis. I will demand an accounting for your lifeblood from the hand of each human, from the hand of each person for that of their brother. I will demand an accounting for a fellow human's life. Whoever sheds human blood shall have their blood shed by humans, for God made the human in his image. You always hear me say that the Torah is very precise in his words. If you had to write this, what you think this verse, these 2 verses tell us, is there a shorter way of writing this?
Don't kill.
Don't kill, and I will avenge. There will be an accounting for those who do, right? There seem to be a lot of repetitive things here. So if we look at it, our sages teach us that the first words of this passage, I will demand an accounting for your lifeblood, is a prohibition against suicide. Yeah, your lifeblood. So God's going to take accounting for your life. He's going to hold you accountable for your life. from the hand of each human, from the hand of each person for that of their brother. So it says twice, from the hand of each human, from the hand of each person for that of their brother. So this is obviously a prohibition against murder, against homicide, right? However, because there's like a double thing here, so the first part, from the hand of each human, is usually referred to as malicious murder. In other words, someone kills someone because they don't like them. But from the hand of each person for that of their brother means that the person who killed you is someone that loves you. Yeah? This is referring to what would be called a mercy killing. When someone kills someone for their benefit. Okay? So the Torah here in the first part addresses three separate types of murder. Right? Suicide, and then homicide, whether done with malice or with mercy. Now, this verse also indicates why suicide and mercy killings are lumped together with malicious murder. Because you would think there'd be a difference between suicide or someone, a physician-assisted suicide, or a mercy killing and malicious murder. But the verse lumps it all together and gives a reason. Why? Look at the last line. For God made the human in his image. The Medrash tells us a parable. If you have a king that comes to a city, and before he comes to the city, they build many statues of him, and they mint coins with his image on it, and they print merch with the king's picture, and someone goes and breaks a statue or burns a t-shirt with the king's image on it. What happens to that person? Did that person deface property, or did he commit treason? So the Medrash was written 2,000 years ago. Go back in time. If there's a king, or even today, if there's a king and you live in that country, you better make sure you don't deface a statue of the king. Yeah. So if a human being is made in God's image, so any type of messing with the human being is messing with God's image, and therefore, as a result, Jewish law forbids any action that not only kills, but expedites death. And this is true even in the case of suffering. Let's go to text 3 on page 60. A person in the throes of death is regarded as a living person in every respect. Though the patient is in terrible agony and they consider death preferable, we are nevertheless forbidden to do anything to hasten their death. The universe and all therein belongs to God, and this is his will. So the answer to case study A is obviously a big fat no. From a Jewish perspective, you are not allowed to do anything, any action to hasten death. Now, this differs from what we discussed in what the US law would be. We discussed that patients can, the Supreme Court's decision was patients can refuse medical treatment. And although the courts didn't rule on physician-assisted suicide, they left it to the court, to the states to decide. In other words, that it's possible to be legal, and 11 states have it legal. From a Torah perspective, this would be a problem. Physician-assisted suicide wouldn't be legal. We're not talking yet about refusing medical treatment. I know we're parallel, but it's not, we're not discussing that yet. We're talking about doing an action to hasten death. And therefore, we're also not allowed to do anything that expedites death, even if it's not going to directly kill him, but it's going to expedite it. We're not allowed to do that. Why?
You're not allowed.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to do anything to hasten death. You're not allowed to, like that. Lost. But it seems to me that if you choose to not have medical treatment,
No, you're letting nature take its course. You're not hasting, you're not making it go.
is it?
How could you? No. Well, one moment. If you think it's a contradiction, then we have to separate the contradiction. Even if you might think that not taking medication is hastening death, so from a Torah perspective, that's not the case. From a Torah perspective, either you're doing something or you're standing back and doing nothing. If that guy would be alone in the forest, okay, and you wouldn't do anything, are you hastening death if you're not there? No, just because you're here and not doing anything, you're not hastening it. You are not lengthening it. And again, that will be the second part. We'll see if that's permitted. We're not discussing that yet. We're going to talk about it. We're not talking about it yet. That's case study B, where the question is, should we replace the tube in the kid's brain? Now we're talking specifically about doing something to hasten death. Okay, so actively terminating life is, from a Jewish perspective, as we saw, a no-no. The question is, what would be the purpose or the mission in life if the person's life has reached a level where they want to die?
They just stopped eating. Be hastening their death, right? So the person just said, I'm not gonna eat anymore.
Okay, so we'll talk about that soon if you're allowed to do that or not. We're not dealing with that yet. Okay, right now we're only talking about doing something like injecting the morphine to levels just to cause death. Okay, and then we'll talk about later what do you do about the pain if you know the medication will eventually cause death. But right now, all we're addressing is actively taking someone's life, even if they want it and they think it's in their best interest. Now the question is, we established from a Jewish perspective, it's never allowed. The question now becomes, what's the purpose of this life if the person has reached their end? First of all, they may not even be conscious or aware of what's going on, but even if they are, the quality of life is such that they don't see the purpose of it. They want to die. So we're forcing them from again, someone wants to follow the Torah is being forced, so to speak, to live. What's the purpose of this life? So I'm going to suggest a few things that a person can find purpose in life. Again, you may not agree with it. You may not find that, you may not relate to it. I promise you, there are people who relate to these things. So just because you don't, doesn't mean these aren't valid points that may be reasons enough for certain people to see the purpose of life, even in the pain and in the suffering. The first is good deeds. And we're going to quote a Mishnah, which really mentions two things. We'll break it into two things, but really they could be technically one and the same, and that is good deeds and repentance. So let's look at text 4 from the Mishnah of Ethics of Our Fathers. A single moment of repentance and good deeds in this world is greater than all the pleasures of the next world. And a single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all the pleasures of the present world. In other words, if you're looking about quality of life or experiencing pleasures, then leave this world, because next world doesn't compare. I mean, you're going to have a better vacation in heaven than you do here. But if we're talking about what's greater? What's greater is a moment in this world because of the good deeds and repentance that can be done. If we would know the magnitude of the accomplishments of hearing the shofar one time, of laying tefillin one time, of putting a coin in charity, of studying a word of Torah, of being kind to someone else, even once. Maimonides says that one act can tip the scale for the whole world to the good. If for someone who appreciates that value, every moment they can live, and again, we're talking about someone who wants to prepare themselves for the world to come, or who wants to fulfill God's mission on this world, any moment you have to do the opportunity to do a mitzvah is infinite. And therefore, that's one reason that can satisfy a person enough to get him through all that pain and suffering, even though there's no hope. The same is true for teshuvah, for repentance. A person can repent like that. Now, we don't know if it happened yet or not. Maybe if they live another week, maybe it can happen. The Talmud says that if someone betroths a woman, he marries a woman on condition. So he says, he gives her a ring and he says, here, I'm betrothed to you. You're betrothed to me with this ring on the condition that I'm a tzaddik. But everyone knows he's a Russian. The guy's he's a good for a no goodnik. He is betrothed. Now, from doubt, we don't know. Therefore, if he wants to get married, he has to do the betrothal again. But if he doesn't want to get married, he needs to write her a bill of divorce. Why? Look at him. The guy's a no goodnik. Because maybe he thought of doing, maybe he had a tshuva, a repentance thought, and all it takes is the choice and the decision to change my life, and I'm a tzaddik. Okay, now I have to go act on it. But that moment, a person can change. So prolonging life gives the person an opportunity to do that.
But what are we talking in some cases that a person doesn't have the ability?
One second. Let's get there. What about a patient who cannot engage in either tshuva or good deeds? So there are two things. First of all, there is value in a soul being in this world. We spoke about it in one of the other courses. There was a big professor, scientist, something in the 70s, 60s that wrote a book about if the world continues to grow up to like 2 billion or 3 billion people, where the world is going to die of starvation. You have population problem. I don't remember. We discussed it. I don't remember the name of the book. Now we're at 8 billion people. Judaism doesn't see more people as a problem. On the contrary, Judaism sees every additional person as part of the solution, because a human being born means another spark of godliness, another divine image in this world. The more people we have, the more divine the world is. Sure, we've got a lot of issues, and it's our job to make sure that divine image shines forth. But the more people, the better, from a Jewish and mystical perspective. So therefore, the longer the soul is in this world, the better it is, not just for them, but for the entire world. So even though they may be in a state where they don't personally get any benefit, remember from last week, it's not about me. I don't belong to myself. I belong to God. I'm here for a mission. So if I'm mission oriented, and part of my mission is to bring light into the world, the longer I'm here, the more light there is. So it's not about my contribution, my conscious contribution. And the last thing is the possibility of inspiring others. I think sometimes the most inspirational stories that touch us the deepest are those from people who have no hope left, or seem to have no hope left, who are on their deathbeds. Some of the most common quotes that people repeat are things that were said in the final moments of life. Right? You ever spoke to healthcare workers or nurses who said that the last thing the patient said was, I wish I would have spent more time in the office. Never happened. Never in human history, right? Why not? The more a person is around, the more possibilities there are to inspire others. And by the way, not even if they're conscious. Sometimes just from there, what do we see when we see a patient that refuses to die? You see something there. It doesn't always feel good, because in the moment we're not thinking about that. But when someone's looking, there's a lot of possible inspiration there that might be, and this isn't just someone who can't function anymore. We're talking even someone who's terminally ill and isn't at that point yet. I think point number 3 is specifically for those who aren't aware or can't perform anything. But inspiring others is a major thing. I mentioned last week the Chabad shliach in California who has ALS. We'll watch a little clip from him. But this is something that can be we can't measure the impact and the influence this can have.
I was talented. I could teach, lecture, sing, dance, and play guitar. I was strong and handy. Within 2 years, I watched all that slip away. I felt irrelevant. I was in jail. What possible purpose could I have, if I couldn't communicate? It hurts not to be able to kiss and hug my children, not to be able to talk and play with them. I could have been prey to a why me attitude and fallen into depression. The problem with why me, is that your focus is on me, the ultimate false deity. Instead, knowing that this is from Hashem makes me think, how could I serve His purpose from my situation? What can be done from my position now that could not be accomplished when I was well? Do I pray? Do I cry out to Hashem that He heal me? Yes, all the time. However, the illness has not broken my spirit. I continue using my difficulties as a platform to lift others up. What keeps me going is the realization that God is real, that He has a plan for the world and I am part of it. Everyone is a part of it and everyone's part is important. So if He put me in this position, He must want something of me that I can only do in this position. When you see it this way, instead of feeling down when you are in a challenging situation, you are filled with a sense of purpose. I choose to focus on the positive parts of my life, and that keeps me going. There is my wife, my children, family, friends, and you. Even within the suffering and difficulties, I can still contribute and help others. Through my blog, I have the opportunity to learn and teach Torah. I forge new friendships with the teens and yeshiva boys that visit. Find your mission and strength specifically from your situation. You don't have to be challenged with suffering to learn this lesson. You need only be alive, because it is Hashem that chooses for you to be alive. Recognizing this is the beginning of meaning in your life. If you are suffering, know that there is purpose in your struggle that can only be realized through your struggle. Find a way to turn your pain into positive, your struggle into strength. There is something else being asked of you, a new stage of your purpose and mission. True, I can't do many of the things I once could, but with what I do have, I have found ways to make a difference. The things I love to do most, to teach and lift others up, I'm still doing. Before, I would speak. Now, I write. It seems that because of my predicament, the words are more effective. In every challenge, or even tragedy, there is an opportunity. You don't have to fight it. Find a way for your struggle to take you to the next level. By taking this attitude, I was filled with a mission to uplift as many as I can through my articles. And my wife Dina became one of the most inspirational speakers and has uplifted tens of thousands. It doesn't fix the problem, but it makes our lives more meaningful and therefore more bearable. Being crushed brought stronger connections, new abilities, higher purpose, and deeper meaning. I've been blessed with a voice that can't sing, with a body that doesn't work. So I dance to a new rhythm. I'm Yitzi Hurwitz, and I know that I matter.
Okay. Based on what the conclusion we've come to, it would seem that because Judaism values every moment of life and forbids mercy killings or physician-assisted suicides, etc., therefore, Jewish law would unambiguously call for any treatment to extend life. Any minute we can get is infinitely valuable. Is that true? Okay, so to answer this question, we're going to look at some texts from the Talmud and from Maimonides. Let's start with text 7. This is what a fascinating story. This is what occurred on the day that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Judah the prince, died. The sages proclaimed a fast, and they supplicated for divine mercy, so that he would not depart from the world. Rabbi Yehuda's maid went up to the attic and prayed. The angels on high asked for Rabbi Yehuda to ascend, right? He's dying. And the people below asked for Rabbi Yehuda to remain. May it be your will that those below prevail over those above. In other words, the people's prayer should prevail and he should remain alive. Later, however, when she saw that he was in great pain, she prayed, may it be your will that those above prevail over those below. In other words, she came to the conclusion that it's better for him to die than to be alive. The sages, however, would not cease praying, which prevented the heavens from gathering his soul. So she grabbed the jug and threw it from the attic to the ground. Stunned by the noise, the sages stopped their prayers momentarily, and in the intervening moment, Rabbi Yehuda's soul departed. Okay. Now let's read text 8, and then we'll see what the conclusions from each one, what the implications of each text are. Well, let's start first before we get to text 8. What would be the implication of text 7? Do you have to do everything to prolong life at any cost for even moments? Well, it would seem it's a debate between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda's maid. The rabbis felt that it is worth it. The maid felt it wasn't. Now, usually, who do we follow? Well, besides that, even if she was a rabbi, who would we follow? The majority opinion. However, many authorities believe that because the Talmud brings this story down, the Talmud doesn't mention a lot of stories about people's maids, because the Talmud brings this story down. Now, Rabbi Yehuda's maid was, by the way, very different. We know she knew a lot of Torah, and she was a genius and a very special woman in her own merit. But that's beside the point. The fact that the Talmud brings it down, many authorities believe, because the Talmud is telling us this is appropriate. Perhaps not in every scenario, but this is an appropriate approach. But at the same time, we have the rabbis that disagree with us. Okay, now let's look at text 8. This is from Maimonides, the laws of Shabbos. Shabbat laws are suspended in the face of danger to life, as are all other mitzvot. Consequently, we follow the direction of a professional physician on hand to attend to all the patient's needs on Shabbat. Now, there's a few dots. It's very important to note this is not just any patient and not just any need. This is a patient whose life is in danger, and the need is, well, to protect their life. Now, sometimes the need might not be, you might not consider it a life need. Like, for example, basic example, the most obvious example is, not obvious, the most close to home example is when a pregnant woman, a woman that's in labor, is considered a life-threatening situation, because things can go pretty bad, even if they don't normally, because it could. That's considered a life-threatening situation, which means that if a woman goes into labor on Shabbos, you can call the taxi, or you can get into your car, or you can call 911 to take her to the hospital. Yeah, but if you call a taxi and you call 911, is the husband allowed to go? His life's not in danger. Is he allowed to violate the Shabbos? What do you think?
I think yes.
Okay. Why you think no? I'm assuming, because why should he be allowed to violate the Shabbos?
Sure, you can take her.
Obviously.
But-
Okay. And because why should he be allowed to? Okay. Why do you say
Medical care.
right? I understand. No, I get it. But why do you? What?
So that you're supposed to be there to support her for life. So I'm guessing that in this case, it'd be the wife. If it was just another person, it would be no, but because it's your wife or your child, I think the answer is yes.
That's a good thought. However, I just heard a noise. Does that mean? Oh, there's a raised hand. Debbie or Earl?
Okay, isn't, because we know someone who went through this, isn't he allowed to go there? But once the danger is over, he's not allowed to come back until after Shabbos is over.
Sure. The question is, why is he allowed to go? She'll be
Mhm.
taken care of. So Jeff is correct. The husband's allowed to go, but the reasoning you gave is incorrect. And the proof is that Jeff made it sound like he's allowed to go because he has a commitment to her. And therefore, if it was her or his kids, his wife or his kids, he's allowed to go. However, that's not the reason. And the reason why that's not the reason is because a person has a prior commitment to God before his commitment to his wife. And that commitment to God is to keep Shabbos unless someone's life is in danger. And because you called 911 and they're taking care of her, her life technically isn't in danger. However, he's still allowed to go. And this reason would extend to anyone, even not his wife. And that is because of that relationship, she will become more nervous and create more risk to life if he's not with her. Therefore, if you have an elderly person who is in shul and wants someone to come with him to the hospital, you call 911, someone falls, they want someone to come, they want the rabbi to come, then you go. Because when someone is in danger and they need someone with them, so for the person's life who's in danger, if they need light, if they're going crazy in the dark, you turn on the light. It doesn't have to be a procedure, but it has to be something that actually might affect their health. If they just say, I want you to tilt the bed a little just for comfort level, you can't press the button to tilt the bed. Because that's not going to get them. But if it's going to get them anxious enough and nervous enough that it'll endanger their life, press the button all day. Doesn't matter. So for a person whose life is in danger and anything that might contribute to that, you're allowed to do on Shabbos. Okay. So now in the middle of text 8.
Split.
If there's doubt, even if there's doubt to life, you do it. Sure.
So like going to the benefit. If you're not sure if it's for life or for people,
Then you do it.
you do it.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
It's not a 50-50 split.
No. It's only if you see the guy's in good spirit or whatever, and he just wants to move a little. But if he's nervous and he's anxious and he's agitated and he's very uncomfortable, then you move the bed. Sure. Yeah. If a structure collapses on Shabbos, the rubble must be clear. We discussed this. We mentioned this last time, I think. If a structure collapses on Shabbos, the rubble must be cleared if there's even a doubt as to whether a person is beneath the debris, although clearing rubble is otherwise forbidden on Shabbos. If a person is discovered alive, even if they are injured and crushed to the extent that it is impossible for them to recover, we must continue clearing the debris to extricate them in the interest of preserving life for a short time. Okay, so now in text 7 we had that the maid tells us, that if you have a terminally ill patient who's suffering, withholding treatment, what was the treatment in that case? The rabbi's prayer, right? Because the angel couldn't take the rabbi's life because they were praying. So the treatment was their prayer. Withholding treatment by throwing the jug and distracting them is permitted. Yeah. But from text 8, we have that even someone who's under the rubble, their body's crushed, they're going to die. There's no chance of survival. You're allowed to violate the Shabbos to prolong their life of suffering, mind you. Someone who's crushed under a collapsed building is suffering. You're allowed to violate the Shabbos to prolong their life even for a minute. Well, it doesn't say how long. There's no, because you might prolong their life. So which way is it? What's the primary approach? Do we allow for death, or do we fight for every moment of life? So we're now going to see a little how the halachic experts grappled with this contradiction almost, because many times this is a contradiction. Most of the times it could be a contradiction. And while we will see that they categorically disapprove of the first half of this lesson, in other words, of assisting someone to die, of actively doing something, when it comes to passively allowing someone to die, there's a lot more disagreement, a lot less clarity as to how far we go and under what circumstances.
When you're talking to someone who's terminally ill and they're near, you're 100% certain is much different than someone who's under rubble. Is it a broken arm or is it a broken knee?
Oh, so the,
I think that in this, like,
no. So let me clarify, because this is part of a big discussion there. It says if there's even a doubt, first of all, when the building collapses, you don't know if anyone's under there. The question is, are you allowed to dig because maybe someone's under there? Okay. So the Mishnah starts, you're allowed to dig because maybe there's someone. Now, if you find someone, so you check if they're alive or not. Now, this is one of the proofs that, and we're not going to be discussing it in this course really, but this is one of the proofs that's used that Judaism follows not brain death, but heart death. And the reason is because it says if you uncover their face and you see they're breathing, you don't know the damage to the rest of their body. You continue going. They might be brain dead, but you know they're breathing. So in other words, the Torah considers them alive. You continue digging, and you're right. We don't know what the condition is. But even once you determine that the condition is terminally ill, in other words, that there's no chance of ever, you still continue digging the person out. Because you can extend their life, perhaps, maybe, you don't even know. You might be able to extend their life for a little bit because now they're not alone under the rubble. They're out breathing some fresh air. But yeah, even once you determine they're absolutely going to die, you continue to violate the Shabbos to remove them.
Yeah, they're not.
because you never, and I think the real answer to that is, in this case, you never know if it's 100% certain that they're gonna die.
Of course you could. Well, obviously 100% God can make miracles, but absent a miracle, you can, there are, even a thousand years ago, when you saw a building collapse on someone, you saw the way their bones are popping out and all the blood loss that's happening and the skull cracked open. You can tell the guy's gonna die. There was no procedures back then to fix that. So even though the guy's breathing, you know he's gonna die any minute. Sorry for being so graphic, but it's just to prove a point. Even if you know they're dying, literally dying. And there are, I mean, even today, you can tell when someone's breathing is becoming shallower and shallower and they're not having enough nutrition and their body isn't cooperating. Okay, so we're going to go back to Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, who we started with he's the one that dealt with the case study B, the child with the cancer in his brain. The question was referred to him. So he ruled that the boy with the cancer in the brain, that surgery was obligatory. And he based his ruling on the text of Maimonides that we just read in text 8, that when you see someone lying under the rubble, even though you know they're going to die momentarily, and they're in excruciating pain, we violate the Shabbos to take them out. And so can treatment be withheld? According to Rabbi Waldenberg, the answer is no. Let's look at text 9. This is from his response to this case. Jewish law asserts that we violate the laws of Shabbos even for the sake of one who is severely injured and can only live a little while longer. When we extricate this person, we inevitably prolong their suffering. Nevertheless, we are obligated to make every effort to prolong their life. If this is so on Shabbat, certainly on a weekday, we are obligated to make every effort to prolong life, even for a brief duration, and even if this entails additional suffering. Okay? What about the story of the maid, of Rebbe's maid? What does he make of that story? So he says that we don't take stories and run with them. We follow the majority. The rabbis of the majority made their view clear that we have to prolong life. The fact that she prevailed doesn't mean that that's the halacha, that should be followed. Now, obviously, if you're going to take this approach, it forces us to take a different perspective on life. We can't view life the way we do. If our knee-jerk reaction is, we can't do this, then obviously the only way you can is if you take a different approach to life. An approach that removes myself from the equation.
No self-determination.
Zero of it. If you have any say or any part in this decision, there's no way you can follow or align with Rabbi Waldenberg's approach. Okay. However, let's make one thing clear. This only applies to doing things that have a reasonable chance of working. Okay. Remember this, last week we spoke about risky treatments. This is not referred to do anything, even something that may not work. You're not obligated to try every expensive medication or every risky procedure that isn't tested or we don't know yet. However, if there's something that you know can extend a person's life, you have an obligation to do that. Now, although some halachic experts do follow this, today, this is considered a minority opinion. Now, many Jews follow this opinion because many Jews try to live their life with this approach to life. This is a valid halachic opinion as it's brought down regarding the laws of Shabbos. However, the question we're asking today is, do you have to? And the answer to that question is, by a majority opinion today, in today's standards at least, a majority of halachic experts will not rule like Rabbi Waldenberg. So on the other end of the spectrum, we have Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who we also mentioned last week, a leading halachic expert in America in the previous century, isn't alive anymore. Says like this in text 10a: if physicians can neither cure a patient nor ease their suffering, they should not administer treatments that only serve to prolong briefly the terminal patient's life and suffering. Okay, you get that? We're not talking about treatments that might prolong their life permanently. We're talking about someone who's for sure going to die. Now, the question is, do I need to administer treatments to prolong their life momentarily? He says no. They should not administer treatments. We infer this from the Talmud's description of Rabbi Yehuda's final illness. The sages' prayers did not produce a cure for Rabbi Yehuda or lessen his agony. They just prolonged his life together with his suffering. But only prolonged his ordeal for as long as they continue to pray. Rabbi Yehuda's maid, who was knowledgeable in Torah, said, "May it be your will that those above prevail over those below." And upon seeing that her prayers could not be effective as long as the sages continued their supplications, she took a jug and smashed it in order to silence them. At that moment, Rabbi Yehuda passed away. This incident is cited in the Talmud to teach us that the maid acted correctly. We can derive from this that a physician should not administer to a patient a treatment that will neither cure them nor alleviate their torment, but will serve only to prolong their life for a short duration in agony. The physician should only administer such treatment if it will soothe the patient.
Well, I agree with the opinion. Why are we allowing the minority opinions? Why is the exception?
What do you mean the exception? Where do you see that? Oh, you're saying the maid versus the rabbis? Oh, okay. Because so why is he choosing the side of the maid versus the side of the rabbis? So right. So one of the simplest answers that he gave for this is that the Talmud recorded it. And the Talmud records it as a story with no objection at the end. In other words, generations later, a majority opinion held that was the correct. So even though in the moment she was a minority, the fact that it's codified in the Talmud makes it a majority. According to him, there aren't many stories like this. According to him, it does. Yeah. Yes, Amy.
So wasn't that story that you just went through the opposite of the first one with the boy with cancer? Or did we miss something?
Well, let's see. The boy with cancer had this tube to remove to drain the fluid, and something wasn't working. It either wasn't working or there was an infection. And if they would replace the tube, they would prolong his life temporarily, but also prolong his suffering. The question is, are they obligated to do that procedure that wouldn't heal him or take away the pain? It would just prolong his life temporarily. In the case of the story of the sages, they were praying, they were keeping him alive, but they weren't making him better, and they weren't lessening his pain. So are they obligated to pray, or should they stop praying? In other words, not administer medication, not perform the procedure to replace the infected tube, or do they have to do it? Does that make sense? Somewhat. Okay. So without getting stuck in the details, both episodes are grappling with if there's an obligation to do something, whatever, to prolong a life that will most certainly die very soon, and you're only prolonging it for, who knows, a few minutes, a few hours, a few days, and you're not removing the pain. You're not benefiting the patient. All you're doing is prolonging their life of suffering. Do you have an obligation to do that procedure?
And what you said is no.
So yeah, based on this opinion, the first opinion that you have on the board, Rabbi Waldenberg says you're not allowed to withhold treatment. You have to do the procedure. You have to continue praying. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, we just read, says no. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says if there's a drug that you can give and all it does is prolong this suffering life, does nothing to heal the patient, and does nothing to diminish their pain, you're allowed to withhold the treatment. However, there are a few exceptions, things you're not allowed to withhold. And this goes back to what Karen asked before about I believe, about a feeding. In text 10b, in my responsum to the physicians, I wrote that one should administer oxygen to a terminally ill patient who has trouble breathing, even though no cure will result, because it eases the patient's suffering. For inability to breathe is tremendously painful. So this is not about life support. This is not about a ventilator. This is just about oxygen. Accordingly, you asked regarding a terminally ill patient who is unable to eat normally. Should we intravenously feed him and thus extend his life while prolonging his suffering when it appears that he has no pain in abstaining from food? My response, and listen till the end. Clearly, we must feed the patient, provided that it will not cause any harm. For food surely strengthens the patient somewhat, despite the possibility that neither the patient nor his attendants are aware of this effect. There is no need, however, to provide medicine with the assumption that it too will strengthen the patient, and the distinction is obvious. Eating is a natural need that is required to strengthen one's body and mind. So, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein would say, do you have to put in the tube? No, because that's dangerous. That can be more painful. But if the patient has it, can you just, and feeding him won't cause more pain. It's important. Feeding him won't, because there are times feeding can cause pain and can kill. So this is already a medical decision, but assuming the feeding won't kill the patient and won't hurt the patient, then you have an obligation to feed, hydrate, and give oxygen to the patient. Again, assuming you're not doing, these are the basic needs. You don't have to give, exactly, because starting a line is painful and is dangerous. But once the line is in and all you're doing is adding, this is why, ironically, and this is not a halachic recording, so don't take this as a halachic ruling. Halachically, not according to Rabbi Waldenberg, but according to most others, it is easier for a rabbi to say, don't go on life support or don't intubate, than to say, do it, because later you can't remove it. Because removing it, you're actively depriving the patient of air. Now, does that mean I would do that? Not necessarily, because Because in my personal life, maybe I want to follow Rabbi Waldman, I want to follow the ideal and disregard pain and suffering because I want to live a life, or I want to believe I want to live a life that's God-centered, not me-centered. But halachically, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to reverse that choice later. That's a choice you have to live with. Later on, if I remember, there was an article someone sent me from the New York Times, I think. I don't remember when it was, where basically a whole study that was recently done saying maybe we shouldn't be so quick to remove patients from ventilators, showing what percentage of patients actually could have gone on to live. In other words, the time frame with which doctors and hospitals use is too quick. We should prolong that a little. I'm not saying everyone that gets on a ventilator will get off. All I'm saying is that the time frame that's usually given to the family to make the decision is a little too quick to make the decision. Yes, question.
I was just thinking about these two different things, and when you're talking about these decisions that really aren't considering the psychological state of the patient, whereas when you were talking about whether or not to violate the laws of Shabbos, like to go to the hospital with a woman who's in labor and that the husband can go because psychologically it could help her. And I find that kind of interesting that or am I taking that the wrong way?
I don't know if you're taking it the wrong way, but it's getting to the wrong conclusion. The husband is not because it's helping her psychologically. It's because it's saving her life through psychology. It could be saving her life using psychology. In other words, by the fact that the husband's there, she's more calm and less likely to risk death. But where the patient's psychology is concerned, that doesn't, in other words, by the way, if the family is overly anxious, you know what you do? Get out. Don't, in other words, if the family in the room is very anxious around the patient about the decisions that have to be made, halacha would probably say, you're not allowed to talk about that in the room. You're not allowed, because you could be in turn making the patient anxious and causing their, so definitely psychology is influences, but as far as the patient's psychology of how much the patient wants to live or not, that has no bearing on it. In other words, if the patient living will make him more anxious, and because of that he'll die, he's going to die anyway. That's not the determinant. So we're saying we're going to kill him because he's going to kill himself by being anxious. That's not. You understand? Okay. However, there is a middle ground. So we have two extremes. We have Rabbi Waldenberg says you're not allowed to withhold treatment. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says you are. You don't give treatment if it's just treatment that prolongs life, doesn't fix anything or doesn't take away any pain. There is a middle ground. And this is text 11. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach of righteous memory told me the following. There is a difference between treatments that satisfy the natural needs of a patient, or those considered ordinary treatments, and those that are considered extraordinary treatments. For example, if a patient suffers from metastasized cancer and is about to die, although they are in pain, we may not withhold the required oxygen, nutrition, and hydration. This sounds like Rav Moshe Feinstein, like the lenient opinion we just had. If they suffer from diabetes, we may not withhold insulin with the intention that they die sooner. Blood transfusions and any other medication that the patient requires, such as antibiotics, which are considered ordinary treatments, should not be withheld. On the other hand, there is no obligation to initiate an extraordinary medical procedure. That is, a procedure that would itself cause much pain, in addition to the pain that this patient already experiences, if this treatment has no chance of curing the underlying disease, but only of extending life for a short duration. Okay, so now, although it seems like,
Is pain the position? So only if it causes pain?
yeah, so he's a middle ground. In other words, Moshe Feinstein says that as long as the patient is terminally ill, you don't have to administer any type of medication that might prolong their life, except for hydration, nutrition, and oxygen. Okay, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says no, that that you should administer treatments, regular treatments. However, irregular treatments, which are usually associated with a lot of extra pain, that you don't have to give.
So someone's dying, metastasizing cancer.
Yeah.
And, their kidneys are shutting down, but they could go put a tube in. That could extend their life 1 day, 3 days, 20 days, you don't know. Do you have to do this?
Putting a tube in, according to him, would not be considered ordinary treatments.
Up to Waldenberg, that would.
Oh, for sure, you have to do that. Waldenberg would say for sure you have to. Again, that's a minority opinion, but he would say you have to do that. Rav Moshe Feinstein says, not even that you don't have to. You don't even have to give regular blood transfusions. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach will say, no, regular blood transfusions, the guy was getting it for the last year and a half, continue doing it. But you don't have to put in an IV, right, a stent, something, because that's already much more painful, and that you don't have to do. The details of specific cases, I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm not that studied in the medical field. So I'm only speaking theoretically, right? Yeah. However, even though this is what he holds, this is halachically, he still suggests that we talk to the patient and we encourage them to adopt Rabbi Waldenberg's view. In other words, Rabbi Feinstein says there's no need to administer drugs. Rabbi Auerbach says there's no need to administer anything painful, anything extraordinary. However, I do get where Rabbi Waldenberg is coming from. I do understand, look at the rabbis in the case of the maid. Even if the maid was correct, the rabbis still felt there's value in painful yet momentary life. So if the patient can make the decision and choose that, that's the best of both worlds. But if the patient doesn't want to, then there's no need. You don't have to. But from an idealistic place, we should encourage the patient to do that.
You can talk about someone else's pain.
100%. And that's why we're sitting here, because these are decisions, although we may unfortunately have to make them for others, one day we may have to make them for ourselves. We should be equipped with making those decisions for ourselves. Before you're in that situation. And by the way, this is, at this point, this stage in a person's life is the most ripe to tear families apart. And if you have clarity at this point, you can spare a lot of anguish, especially if there are multiple loved ones in your life or multiple people that might be forced to make a decision. If you have clarity and you make the decision and you tell them what you want, this is very important. So let's go to on page 77. There's just a quick chart. Let's just run through the different things we've covered, and then we'll finish with some practical things. Physician-assisted suicide, no one agrees you can do this. The chart on page 77. Removing a respirator or anything else keeping the person alive, again, no one says you can do, because in the act you're doing, you're removing their ability to live, so to speak. Declining hydration, nutrition, and oxygen, assuming it's not killing them, okay? Again, everyone would agree you have to continue doing this. However, declining non-painful, life-extending treatment, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is the only one that says this is permitted. In other words, you don't have to give any treatment, only hydration, nutrition, and oxygen. And then, if it's declining painful treatment, then even Rabbi Auerbach would say that you're allowed to decline that. However, preferably would be to talk to the patient and see if he would want to accept it. However, there is no obligation. Okay, based on what we learned so far, is a DNR or a DNI, you know what the DNI stands for?
Do not intimate.
Intimate, very good. Is such an order appropriate? Are living wills acceptable according to Jewish law? So before I give such general principles about such important issues, I want to just remind you that each case is different, because a 104-year-old that has cancer, a DNR may be different than a 35-year-old or even an 80-year-old that's otherwise healthy. Because the chances of an 80-year-old healthy person being resuscitated and gaining function of life is much higher than a 104-year-old cancer patient, right? So each case could be different. So before we give blanket statements, these are just generalities. These are not blanket statements. So what are factors that play a role? So here are some factors that don't play a role. Age, mental ability, and physical ability alone don't play a role. Just because someone's elderly, or just because someone might be young and physically unhealthy, these things alone don't play a role. However, if these things play into the prognosis and the pain and suffering, then this can play a role in whether these things are allowed or not. Yeah? If the person is suffering, they're in the hospital, they're going through cancer treatment, and the prognosis is not good, and they have then it might be okay to have a DNR, because the chances of getting back from a DNR might be much lower. I'm just giving a hypothetical. Again, my medical expertise is zero, so I might be giving an example that actually does have a high rate. But imagine you have an example of someone where the possibility, the prognosis, and the pain and suffering together make it very unlikely. Then Rabbi Moshe Feinstein might say it is okay to have a DNR or a DNI. However, Jewish law does not support a universal type of thing, DNR, DNI. And the reason is, one of the reasons is, because most doctors, most hospitals, they see a DNR, and to them it means do not treat, not just do not resuscitate. And that could lead to many problems. And I'll just give you a simple example, not example of this case, but a simple example of so organ donation. We're going to talk a little bit about that in lesson 4, not about organ donation specifically necessarily, but about afterlife and end life and afterlife. But organ donation, many organs can be halachically donated. Some are more problematic. What do? The question is, if something can save someone else's life, the problem is, when do we consider the person dead? Once the person is halachically dead, which for most opinions would be when the heart stops, most organs aren't usable at that point. But let's say you could use an organ at that point, you'd be allowed to do it.
We can donate our organs?
You didn't hear what I just said, right? Wait a minute. If you can you donate a kidney as a line? So what? But that's an organ you can donate after you die. Part of organ donation is kidneys, liver, all these things get, the lungs, everything gets donated. But why? Because the heart's still beating, so all of these things are still alive.
Oh, we had to be very focused.
You do. But if something can be used to save a life, then you do that. Now, we don't do it to save a life in future generations. So to donate your body to potentially, right, for research, for science, even though potentially down the line it could save a life. If right now it could save a life, absolutely donate whatever you can. But the problem is, here's the problem. The problem is, if you write on your driver's license, I'm an organ donor, who gets to decide when you die? Usually the hospital. And even if the family makes a decision, they're going to push you hard. You're basically giving up everything, all your rights. So what do? You have a healthcare proxy. You have someone who is allowed to make decisions for you. Whether it's a spouse, a sibling, a child, a friend. And you involve a rabbi. In other words, you tell them the healthcare proxy, I want you to make decisions, but I want you to make decisions based on what I discussed with the rabbi. And at that point, if there is halachic permissibility to donate organs, even if you're not an organ donor, if you get to the hospital and you choose to be an organ donor, you can. So writing it on the license doesn't make you give up your rights to donate organs. It just means no one else can do it for you, right? If you're found on the side of the highway and they can't find your family, they'll make the decision for you. All you're doing by writing no is saying, I want to make the choice myself. You make a healthcare proxy, you have a rabbi involved, and then the decision can be made depending on the decision, depending on the situation. Let's read text 12 quickly. Huh?
It's just a little bit everything I always thought.
That's why you're here. The living will, however, which attempts to spell out in advance which treatments should be employed and which should not, is too blunt of an instrument to accurately mirror the necessary value judgments. The basis for all these decisions is the pain and suffering the patient feels at the time of the illness. And this can simply not be predicted in advance. Conditions that may seem intolerable to us when we are 35 or 40 may be quite adequate when we reach 85 and we realize that the alternative would be death. Keep in mind, that to many patients, such as those with advanced Alzheimer's or in comas, may in fact not be suffering, though their existence is undoubtedly a hardship to their families. Moreover, it is almost impossible to spell out all contingencies in advance, making living wills incomplete almost by definition. But by making blanket statements, not knowing the situation, that's too vague for Jewish law. Far preferable to the living will is the durable power of attorney, often called a healthcare proxy, which simply specifies a person, family member, friend, or clergyman empowered to make healthcare decisions on the patient's behalf in the event he or she is incapacitated. The power may, in addition, specify that all decisions shall be made in accordance with Jewish law and in consultation with the designated clergyman of the patient's choice. This document ensures that decisions will be made consistently with the moral and religious beliefs that the patient holds dear. Obviously, one should discuss these delicate matters ahead of time, both with family members and spiritual advisors. There is an addendum, there's a sample healthcare proxy, halachic healthcare proxy provided by the Rabbinical Council of America. Now, according to all positions, a halachic expert should be involved because it ensures that care aligns with Jewish law. However, I want to re-emphasize what we mentioned last week, that when you have an outside party involved in these decisions, it will also mitigate, or helps at least, mitigate guilt and confusion for the family when they're not sure what to do.
Yeah. Sometimes you're in the middle of things, make good decisions.
There's no question that your loved ones want what's best for you. But when they're hurting, seeing you like that, the chances of them not being able to make the right decision, or what they may deem the right decision, it goes up significantly.
The opposite though, right? So sometimes you're married to someone for 50 years and they have cancer and it's terminal. And putting a stent in will keep them alive a few more days, but also increase their suffering. But you want those few more days. So sometimes it's opposite of what you think. You think the person would make the decision to let them go peacefully with kidney failure instead of this, but sometimes that's not what happens either.
That's why it has to be a third party that's not invested. The hospital's invested in their way, families invest. Now, the rabbi also cares, obviously, but is not invested in the same way. The rabbi can, a third party can see things from more of an objective perspective, hopefully. I want to reiterate, these are not easy decisions to be made. And we're speaking about it, flippantly, not flippantly, but we're speaking about it as if choose this way or that way. These two choices really depend on perspectives on life and really outlooks on life. And that's why it's so important to try to think about it and learn about it and acclimate oneself to it as early as possible so that we can try to come to terms, if we want to follow the Torah's directives, which path to follow, because even Rabbi Auerbach or even Rabbi Feinstein to many is too much. The fact that you have to hydrate and give oxygen and feed is already a lot more than what many people do. So no matter how you're going, even if you're going with the most lenient opinion, but you want to follow the Torah's directives, this is going to be something that you're going to want to prepare yourself for. Next week, we will talk about the beginning of life and pregnancy. So make sure to join us for that. And you can continue and find more information at myjli.com/decisions. And I look forward to seeing you, God willing, next week. Any questions, comments?